Okay, my name's Steve Smith, and this is Spence Harbour.
Hello.
And we're going to do a session today on the Managed Metadata Service, configuring, using, understanding for the IT pros. How many of you in this room, just a quick catch-up for hands up, were in my power user session yesterday on user adoption? Anybody? All right. So this is going to be a nice one for you lot, because you're going to follow on from the stuff we were talking about. Obviously, might get a bit of recap on some things, because, of course, despite the fact we were showing the IW people how important metadata was, we were, of course, pointing out the fact that if the IT pros aren't doing their bit, it will not work. So we're going to create the full picture here. A little bit of history about the two of us. Spence, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm basically based in Edinburgh. I primarily focus in the architecture space around SharePoint. Been working for way too long with SharePoint since the early days, and done quite a lot of work with information architecture consulting for large customers, so figuring out how to design their taxonomy and their managed metadata.
Okay, and myself, again, equally far too old in the SharePoint space, I guess. From my perspective, training SharePoint since it was first SharePoint, and also implementing it as Spence does, and being involved in design and planning in the real world with businesses, and also, I guess from my perspective, as somebody who's very much been involved in business processes over the years, aligning technology, because my history is very much IT pro-focused. I'm an infrastructure guy historically, who slowly over the last 15 years melded into the business angle as well, ended up getting involved in not just architecting infrastructure, but also architecting the user space and things like taxonomies and navigational structures on SharePoint as well, even though it's not directly necessarily a SharePoint piece. And so I guess Spence and I, when we looked at this session, we kind of said to ourselves, we really, hopefully, are going to give you guys that are IT pros especially, both sides of the coin here, because a lot of times as IT pros, it's very fixed and linear configuration. We know where we want to go. It's a clickety-clickety-clickety-click. We tick a few boxes. We set it when we want to do something if it doesn't work. And all being well, the users then take over their space and do their bit. But there is quite a lot of understanding from an IT pro's perspective of what's going on with the managed metadata service. And we're going to try and hopefully get that over to you. And to some degree, we'll be delving into the IW space so you understand why we're doing that. So what are we going to cover? We're going to cover the terminology behind it. Because again, as IT pros, you guys are going to get given all these business project managers and the IW people coming up and saying, we're going to develop this fantastic thing. And you're going to go, I have no idea what you're talking about. That's gibberish. Is it a web application? Oh, I don't know. So we're going to make sure we align the technical side to the actual terminology side. Very important to understand that. We'll actually have an overview of the Managed Metadata Service itself, which is, of course, a brand new service to SharePoint 2010. We're then going to look at the specific terminology breakdown of how the actual service is configured through the term store. We'll also then delve into the second part of the service, which is the content type syndication. And we have to delve a little bit here into the IW logic, because we have to align what the end users are actually doing here so we understand the implication as an admin. And then we'll have some recommendations at the end of it. There are demos as well, just so you know. Here's 3 things that most admins never ever get involved in a lot of the time. Or the admins do get involved and they're the only people doing it, and hence it goes wrong. Right? Because the bottom line is, we're talking about information architecture, understanding the logical business needs. Where is information structured? Where does it need to go? What are the business processes behind it? And a lot of times, companies fail to do this correctly in SharePoint, because we go off and we try and treat it as an exchange server for mail or a SQL box for data storage. We don't treat SharePoint as something that over 5 to 10 years is actually going to grow and be nurtured and become this vision that we've actually got for it. So information architecture plays a key part of our managed metadata structure that we're going to build. And we cannot do it alone as IT pros. We must have people who understand that logical business piece, the way that users use content and items and the way that it flows through our business logic. It needs to be coherent, because if it doesn't, if it's not going to flow and and be understood by the users, they're not going to use it. So if at the end of the day, they can be given all these fantastic WYSIWYG methodologies, but if they don't actually look at it and go, yeah, I know what that means, they're not going to use it, right? And then we just go back to the same problem we've always had with trying to deploy any document management system or metadata-driven system, where after 6 months it just does not get used. Or you end up with 3 or 4 or 5 core power users departmental-wise who seem to end up doing it all. Somebody goes up to them and says, you know what you're doing, can you do this for me? Which is not really the point of this. The taxonomy behind it. So again, this is a term that we've been using for a while, right? In the administrative world, we've used taxonomy as way back as when SharePoint first came out, the ability to categorize content. So that when somebody goes to a particular area or a page within the SharePoint UI, which is usually at the top layer, right, with that intranet, at the portal layer, we've taxonomized our categorization to help people instantly know where they're meant to go. A bit like the yellow pages in the phone book. A bit like the BBC. A bit like Amazon. Now, if these guys didn't get their taxonomies right, you'd never go back to their sites, right? It's no different for our business structure. Metadata, managed metadata, and our whole term store logic has to be built around not just getting the right information in, but also the taxonomy behind it. So that's what we're talking about. And the metadata itself is that physical data. It's the pieces that are being put in. So if somebody says to you, right, I want you to create an Amazon page where you always get the things that you like to see when you shop. Of course, if you like sci-fi and a particular author, etc., you put those things in. If you go and put in the wrong author, you're going to see the wrong page every time you go there, and you're going to go, well, that's not relevant for me. It's no different here. So the information architecture practice discipline, generally, okay? And I guess we're kind of talking SharePoint specific here, but in general industry and business, it's very immature. I mean, businesses do not take this piece seriously. And I did a session yesterday. For those of you who were not in my power user session yesterday on the whole business adoption and why it fails, I specifically addressed this point, which is, things that we can do to help address this and planning and design methodologies before we go live. If we don't do those methodologies and design practices before we ever go live, you're hardly ever going to keep up afterwards. You're never going to suddenly put it right 2 months later, because by then people are using it and it's already growing out of control. Give it a year and it's impossible to pull it back. And so if we as IT pros are given the pure responsibility of trying to design this, it's just not going to work, because we have to have that feedback and that design approach from our other facets of the business in order to build the true scalable model and have it nurture over that time. The term hoodwinks of projects from the get-go basically says, we just try and get by, don't we? We're just told, well, it'll be okay. Can you just create it? Create it, just do it. We'll sort it out. How often does that happen in the IT world, right? Especially with SharePoint. And we try and create a site collection, or we try and create a web app to host some things for partners and all the rest of it. And then 2 months later, the partner says, but how do I do this? I'm trying to search for something. I can never find it. It's all relevant. Everything catches up with us in the end. And unfortunately, with the information architecture piece aligned to SharePoint, aligned to managed metadata, these 3 things must be a core part of that design process. And if that means you have to take 6 more months before you can go live with your SharePoint 2010 project, so be it. you've probably got plenty of other stuff as IT pros that you've got to sort out first anyway, like maybe upgrading your SQL servers and planning your scalability and architecture model, which I'll be talking about in the next session after the end of the sessions today. Internal views of an organisation, poorly suited to users or customers. I always like to think of building an intranet. If you go back in time, for those of you that have designed or built or helped structure intranets for your business, all too often, again, we've built our intranets and our facing pages in a way that we think aligns to what they want, rather than the other way around, and have them help structure the top down from the beginning, which is therefore going to help align that business model beneath it. So currently, more often than not, these are very poorly approached business processes, and we need to fix it. I guess from an IT pro perspective, the reality is you need to take a stance on it and say, no, we're not going to do it this way. You can throw as much money at this as you want. You can spend tens and thousands of dollars at it. After 6 months, if it's not done right, after a year, after 2 years, that's going to be an expensive, static bunch of content that you can do nothing with, that makes no sense to 80% of your users. So at the end of the day, why implement this fantastic new service called Managed Metadata if you're just going to half-bake it and just keep throwing wasted dollars at it? I'm not going to mention the consultants. Oh, sorry.
Oops,
I've got a mic on. If you're going to get people come in and help you with this stuff, make sure they understand things like the information architecture structure, taxonomy, how to align those business processes. It's a very critical part. We're not saying that every company has these skills in-house. Not at all. Sometimes you do need to bring people in that are experts in that area of aligning the two. But one thing that I do always know for sure, people who are good project and information architects don't just understand the business alignment of that, they also understand SharePoint under the hood as an information worker stroke power user. They know how to align it. So it's something that you do either need internally or to find somebody that can help you. This is a word. Right? It exists. It's a real word.
You can use it in Scrabble now.
It was Scrabble, yeah. How many is left? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 on a... Oh, gosh, this is a winner. This is a Scrabble winner, isn't it? And it's not SharePoint specific. It's not Managed Metadata specific. If you actually start looking up information architecture, white papers, and the rest of the stories behind getting all this structure together, you'll find putabilities in there. Making sure that you get the correct content put in at the right place from the right people with the right metadata aligned to it. That's the ivory white tower that we're trying to achieve here, especially with the metadata service. The truth is, what goes in, comes out. Garbage in, garbage out. I can't find anything. How many times have we heard that in search? I've put all this stuff in, 2 days later, not there. What they actually meant was, I went through the first 6 pages of search and I still couldn't find it. It was probably 8 pages down. Why? Because there was all this other stuff that had come above it that was being ranked and had a higher relevance for other factors, not just by the fact that they'd put a very weak query term necessarily in their search parameter. And one of the problems that we have in IT is that I guess we set up the search service, and this is another example of where we align metadata and information architecture against things like the search service. We think the search service, okay, let me rephrase that. Too often in the past, IT pros have taken the assumption that the search service will sort it out just because I've started it and I've been indexing stuff. Okay? And Neil did a search. Has he already done his search? I can't remember if he did it or is it...
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah. Did anybody go to Neil's search session? Yeah? There's a lot of home truth there, right, in the configuration and all the things that we have to think about for search. There's a lot of stuff behind that search engine. A lot more than we can talk about in an hour. But if you're putting rubbish in and the users aren't tagging it and metadataing it and putting it in the right context in the first place, search is not going to help you unless you've done an awful lot of extension into search with things like managed properties and all the rest of it, which we should still look at. But we shouldn't have to be fixing holes in our metadata system because the search isn't quite aligning to it and we have to try and fix search. That's just going to create more headaches for you guys. Our users will resist taking the time to put quality information into the system. Let's nail that one right down, isn't it? I mean, how true is that? You go into a business and say, we're going to give you this fantastic new way of putting all this fantastic stuff in, and it's a completely new way for you to do things. And we're not actually going to tell you what you need to put in, you've just got to guess. How many people in this audience could clarify now that that has happened in their business when they've tried to deploy SharePoint, especially with metadata and content types so far? Anybody have that problem? Yeah, come on, you can. Everybody's like, I'm not putting my hand up. There's a lot of you out there, I know. The thing is, we started creating content types in 2007. Site collection bound, started to do low-level structure. People were creating content types with its managed metadata, with its metadata field values, the columns. The problem is, isn't it, when they start doing that and the user goes to save a document and they've got these field values in there, in their Office or Word or whatever, they're not quite sure what they're meant to put in there half the time. And half the time, they can put anything they want because it's not a restricted drop-down or anything like that anyway. So they just put stuff in because they think it's right. To expect a user, an average user, to understand that putability context and they have no help and no predefined system that they're following, you're going to get garbage in. And therefore, search and everything else will be garbage out. It's going to be hard to create those filter values. Findability is directly impacted, therefore, by your putability practices. That as a statement alone is the one you should take from this slide, right? So how does the managed metadata service give us the flexibility to help us with that putability? Depending on which scale you're looking at, whether you're looking at the fixed compliancy records management angle. So obviously we've got the element where content is going to be in our business logic. We need to surface it up to our record center, which is probably going to be in its own web application, which is probably going to potentially be in its own farm, depending on what your security models are. It's going to be very managed taxonomy, very managed metadata, isn't it? You're going to know what you need to capture for it to be surfaced correctly. You're going to create routing rules and making sure that you have workflow that knows what to do. If somebody aligns a contract for sales into a particular metadata, it's going to make sure it triggers that action. And as we work our way across, depending on which space we're in within SharePoint, whether we're in, for example, corporate intranet, that kind of sits in the middle because there could be an element of fixed hierarchy, fixed metadata that we need to surface up. A bit like the Amazon logic, isn't it, where you've got your fixed books and your taxonomy at the top. But there could also be an element where you've got some query-based navigation that's pretty much building itself on the fly because people have gone into, say, a projects category, and depending on who they are, they might be wanting to roll up projects created in a particular field, such as, you know, car racing, motor racing, or something like that, against a different type of project. So that would be a more dynamic taxonomy against a fixed taxonomy. One would have structured metadata, the other would not. We go to the far scale of the flexibility, and we get to folksonomy. Also a true word. So you're getting all these great Scrabble terms out of this, right? Now, folksonomy is the complete opposite. This is where we're saying to users, you know what you're dealing with, you're going to tag it, you know what to tag it with, you therefore can do it and have zero restrictions, and that is now going to go against things like your profile, your My Sites, other people can interact with that, the whole social networking piece comes in, and next thing you know, we've got search utilising the folksonomy as well as the fixed metadata taxonomy, so that when users do search queries, they don't have to worry so much about getting the exact query syntax right because we build the search results around both mechanisms. And the search is now clever enough, right, through our categorization and our return web parts to actually present that and structure it to the users. To say, you know, this is what we found through the social hierarchy, this is what we found through the compliancy side, assuming they're allowed to see it. So we go both ends of the scale when we talk about that metadata planning. So findability, obviously what we've just been talking about, the ability to find all this content, whether it be through dynamic abilities of query-based search web parts, whether it's through search itself, or whether it's through the roll-up and aggregation of content. Truths, you can't use what you can't find. End of the story. If anybody in the boardroom says, well, we'll assume the users know what that means, that's a fail, instantly, right? Amazon figured the third one out. Our customers can't purchase what they can't find. How many people in the audience, hands raised, how many people in the audience have gone to a website thinking they were going to buy something and left and gone and bought it from somewhere else because the website was a complete farce? Right, think about the same thing for your end users in SharePoint. This is exactly what the managed metadata will do for your business, right or wrong. What you've just described is if it's done right or wrong. Okay, same thing. Information that can't be found is worthless. There was a study on this about the amount of information that is created and stored in IT systems in file shares and never, ever accessed again. It was phenomenal. Do you ever know what the percentage was for that?
It was pretty big.
It was like 70% or something.
72, 75.
Some stupid number.
Most of it was build documentation, right? Yeah. Farm build documentation.
Yeah, backup and restore procedures, I think, was the most common one at the top. And you always sum this up, right? If you say to a user, so why did you just recreate that document? Oh, I couldn't find the other one. So you find out how many people are involved in that project, and you can say, how many people have got a copy of that project document? And there are like 20 of them all raising their hand. And not one of them has the same version of the same as the other one. It's a very scary truth. And to some degree, how can we as IT pros actually help define some of the architecture if we've not figured that out? It's quite important, isn't it? You know, you guys could go off and start tracing all this stuff and monitoring and getting all that information back from your file shares and SharePoint and start gathering it all and saying to your business, look, this is a report of access files, modified files, and what we've got in our system now. This is what we're trying to fix. So what we're going to do is quickly go through the managed metadata service itself, and then Spencer's going to build it. Right, Spence?
Yeah, I suppose so. We'll see how it goes. As long as there's no fire alarm in the middle, we should be good.
Which we know blitzes demos. Red flashy lights and demos, they just never work. We've realised that. We've got the conference party to look forward to regardless, right? So it doesn't really matter. Here we go. This is the way it's broken down. In a minute, we're going to show you how to build the managed metadata service application itself. Once we've built the service application, we then have to, well, as part of building the application service, I'm going to let Spence drill down more into that in a minute, we're going to have two defined elements of it. It's split into something called a content type hub and a term store. The content type hub, I'll deal with that one very briefly before we move through, because we're going to see more of it in a minute. But this is our enterprise content types. It's basically a gallery, much like our site collections, where we're creating content types and defining all the parameters that we've used to do in the past and publishing them to be available through our enterprise. Okay? So it's an application that is managed in our farm and is pointing to a specific content type gallery that we're going to use. So there'll be one location that we will configure as part of that managed metadata service. One content type hub. Which means if I need a second content type hub for other use, maybe through a partner system or whatever, you're obviously going to create two managed metadata services. Remember on my services talk yesterday how I was showing you that we can just a la carte create and consume services? The managed metadata service is no different. As Spence did in his multi-tenancy talk, where he talked about the ability to actually host and consume through site collections. We could do that through managed metadata as well, which means we could create this structure per partner, per client, per division, per group within our business. On the right-hand side is what we're going to dig into a little bit more at this point. The term store itself, which is the piece that's holding all that metadata. Spencer's going to go through the configuration of the core. I'll leave that one to you, Spence, in a minute. Term stores. This is the top level that we just saw on that diagram. Has a database, which means the service itself is aligned to its own database. Therefore, we've got scalability, high availability, and disaster recovery around that single database, which is obviously therefore aligned to that service. Usage limits on that is 1, because it holds all the security access control pieces. So if we need another term store, we need another service. An example of that would be obviously per partner, per client, etc. Term set, a collection of terms around it. So for example, underneath that, we're going to have things like by department. We might have by partner, by client, depends how we want to structure it. We can have lots of those groups. Have we got the numbers on the back in a minute?
I think they're on the first slide, but they might be.
The amounts. We'll get that to in a minute. But basically, this is, you can have lots and lots of thousands of the groups that can hold the various terms within it. This was the one that we put the numbers on. So the term set itself is obviously where we are creating specifics within the terms of say, the departments. So let's say, for example, we've got a term of retail. We'd then have term sets of various products within the retail business. So we might have products around clothing, products around food, products around DVDs. In fact, if you're Tesco's, you'd be going on and on, wouldn't you? Finance, and we'd have all these different sub-terms below them.
Pet insurance.
Absolutely. Be insuring our chairs soon. And the bottom line is, what we're trying to do here is create a managed structure so that we can create the actual terms, the metadata themselves, and they have somewhere to live that tangibly makes sense to the user. So if a user creates a document and it's a product, what type of product is it? Is it a chair? Put it in the chair set then. That's where it lives. So we're creating a logical structure here. 30,000 terms per term set. 1,000 term sets per term store. If any of you get to the end of that 30,000 terms, could you let me know? Because I'd love to see it. It'd be nice, wouldn't it? It'd be an impressive...
You need a widescreen monitor.
Yeah, but it would be good to see. But the core is, if you've got to design it, right? You're going to design this in your architecture. The terms themselves, now we're talking. The actual piece that the users are going to be involved in. The metadata. This is the bit that's going to be grouped by those term sets that we just talked about. A keyword or a phrase associated with a particular piece. We all know what this stuff is. This is the stuff that we search for when we go to Amazon, or we go into the BBC and we start locking down exactly what we're looking for, and the categorization pieces that we see if we're using the Financial Times website. You're looking for a particular financial piece of information, subcategorizes it on the left-hand side by terms, doesn't it? I want to look for football. What bit? Tables, match results, fixtures? What are you looking for? It makes sense when we use their websites, but they have to do a lot of work to make that happen. So a good example of a term would be a column that we create in an enterprise content type. We can enter the metadata in many different ways. The obvious way is the web browser. We can integrate as well through the Office client, and you can actually tag in third-party custom apps that may have their own term store add-ons for SharePoint. I'll let you show. Obviously, there's the import CSV, isn't there, as part of the service? Well, we'll show that in a minute. Yep. But we can export and import term sets. So when you're creating your terms in your own business, obviously the idea is to get people helping you build that. And so, therefore, you can actually create a headed CSV if you wanted to and import the whole thing into the term store and build it within the term store. You don't need to manually do it in the term store to get started, right? Have we got one of those to show?
Yep, yeah, we can do that.
There you go.
Yeah, that's very good.
Just like
good
that.
plant, that.
Anybody think I've seen that slide?
Yeah, I guess so.
So Spencer's going to go through the whole creation and management of this store. Watch out, the red light's flashing.
Okay, so we've got just a single server here, and just to give you a little bit of context, we've got one web application which is SP 2010, 2 site collections in there. The one at the root is this regular team site, and I have one at /MD hub over here, which is using a publishing site template. And we'll come back. I've kind of just done that to save time. We'll come back to that in the second demonstration. So in terms of setting this up, I've already done this. There's no point in sort of going through these steps in the time we've got. But I'll show you what's happened.
I'm going to show it tomorrow.
Oh, okay, there you go. If you want to see it, it'll be in the last session tomorrow in the IT Pro track that Steve will walk through building out some of this stuff. So there's a couple of things I need to do that were on the slide. The first one is I need to create an instance or a service machine instance, which is the managed metadata web service, which is in here somewhere. This guy, I'm going to move my mouse up here so I can use it. The managed metadata web service in the middle here. So that guy's been started on this machine. And then I need my service application and, of course, the proxy. So again, I've already gone ahead and done that. Here we have the two of them here. So I've just created these, just from here, using new ding-ding-ding. You can see Steve do that tomorrow. But I haven't configured them yet. And so if I drop into the properties of the service application itself, I have all the standard things. And you can see at the top here, we've got a name. And there's the database that Steve was talking about. So that's where all this stuff is going to get stored in that database. And then we have, the application pool that it's hosted in. And down the bottom, so the first two are kind of standard service application settings. This one is specific to manage metadata. And it's asking us here to enter the URL of the site collection content type hub from which the service application will consume content types. So I'm not going to fill that in for now because that's part of the sort of second demo. But just be aware that that setting is there. And my managed metadata service application proxy or service connection, depending on your which marketing team in Microsoft you work for, or what day of the week it is, has got these 4 options. And we can specify if this service application is the default storage location for terms. So Steve mentioned you might have 2 managed metadata service apps for 2 different parts of the business, for example. So one of them is going to be the default. This is how you select that. You can also set it to be the default for column-specific term sets. You notice the next one is grayed out because I haven't entered a hub yet. So I can't tell this to consume content from the content type gallery because there is no content type gallery to consume from. So as soon as I enter the hub in the other screen later on, this one will light up. And the other one is around pushing down the updates. And of course, these are the defaults, right? The last one isn't going to have any effect because there is no content type gallery. So that's the setup and configuration. Come along to the session tomorrow to see how we create those. So I'm in central administration here. In service application management here. If I then choose to manage this service application, it's going to take me to a thing called the term store management tool. And this is the core user interface for managing our terms.
Actually, that's an important point, isn't it? It's the user interface.
Yeah. Now, this is kind of where the whole service application delegation thing gets a bit murky because some tools like this are intended to be used by the end users. Some are intended to be used like user profile import, right? You don't want your end users in those screens at all. So you need to be a little bit careful about that. But the end users are not going to access this from central admin. Okay, I'm in my team site over here. If I go to my site collection settings, I also have a link to the term store management here under site administration. And it takes me to exactly the same, well, it appears to be exactly the same interface. And of course, my URL is not going to central admin here, so you don't have to do anything to let end users get busy in here. So here, the UI, you can see I can choose which service application to manage if I have more than one. I can set the term store administrators here. if I have language packs installed also, you can see the other languages that are available. If you care about multilingual, I've got a session this afternoon on, and I'll actually show this then. So as Steve mentioned, we could go ahead here and create a new group, and we'll call this evolutions. I create a new term set called tracks, and I could go ahead and, create a term, and we'll do IT Pro, and we'll do, do another one. I should have just hit enter there. I could, I can go down any level deep as well if I want to. So this could be, level 200, etc., etc. But I'll do another one here.
If you did IT 101, it would have made no sense 2 days ago.
We go in here and create a term. We'll call this one IW. Hit enter. I'll do another one for the weirdos next door. Sorry, for the developers. Now. It's pretty painful watching me type, I know, but you don't want to be doing this, right? I mean, this is a simple example. The more terms you've got, obviously, the more hassle you're going to have here. So this is nice for the end users when they are just doing a small little bits and pieces. But if we've got a term set already, as Steve was talking about, you have to marry the SharePoint technical implementation of metadata to somebody, an expert in information architecture, that's defining what that metadata is, or the taxonomy is. So hopefully somebody has already done that piece of work. And then I can go ahead and take the work that they've done by importing the output of their delivery. Now most of those guys, those information architecture consultants, they live in Excel. So that's quite good because we can now import from a CSV file. I've got a bunch of these on my desktop here, I hope. Yeah, there you go. So I can bring one in and... no. Yeah, Steve, sort that out. It's an iPhone, I don't know how it works. I'm going to import I'm going to import the products and technologies CSV file in here, and we get our spinning GIF. So the spinning GIF hasn't gone away completely. It still exists in 2010.
And it could be replaced by a fantastic caveman smashing his club around. Did you
yeah.
know that? Really good. It's very impressive.
The thing is, it's telling me here that there weren't, all the terms weren't imported successfully. We don't have to worry about that. We've got some of them. We're very lucky, actually, that spinning GIF is not Silverlight. Because, by the time it had downloaded and started playing, the task would have been finished. Right?
Would have moved on.
So anyway, here now we've got, a bunch of stuff here, products and technologies, dev tools for the widows next door that know what that stuff means. And there's our digital dashboard from the keynote there. So you can see the idea, the CSV import's the way to go here. Just very quickly, if you want to spend too long on this, just open this up in Notepad. It's very straightforward. This stuff at the top is which term set you're in, what the locale identifier is, and so on and so forth. And then we actually get into our groups and terms here. So very simple file format there. Interestingly, it's not some big bloated XML file format that they seem to prefer for everything else. So I've got that metadata in there now. I want to be able to make use of it. How's that surface to the end users? It's all very well having that in there, but how do we use it? So I'm just going to go back up to the home page here, go into the shared documents library, and I'm going to create a new column on this library. And we'll give it a name called, Prod Tech. I'm not the guy you want coming in doing your taxonomy, by the way, because I don't know nothing about anything. And down the bottom here, we have a new column type called Manage Metadata, just down the end of the list there. So I select that, and it will refresh this screen. Make that bigger. And here now you can see the term set settings, and I can specify that I want to use a managed term set or customizing term set by sort of typing in the details here. So Steve's diagram where he talked about the tightly locked down managed taxonomy and the folksonomy on the other end, we've basically got the two options here as well. So I'm going to choose to use the managed metadata that I've already included, my products and technologies here. So just select that. And I have a search thing here, so I can, for a term set of 1 million items, we could search for our term rather than, clicking through this.
Which is going to be very important for the people that are in charge of actually managing this after you've passed it over, right?
Yeah. And then down the bottom here, I have the default value, and you'll see this little icon at the edge of the text box. Well, maybe you can't see it. I'll make it a bit bigger. It's this guy here. And this shows up next to any text box in SharePoint that is linked to metadata. And as soon as I start typing, it's going to give me suggestions. So it's kind of like IntelliSense autocomplete. You look like you're writing a letter, type thing. And, so I can keep going here. Now, unfortunately, it usually looks better than this because I can make this bigger, but because I'm at the bottom of the page, I can't make it any bigger. But we'll just choose .NET Services. Doesn't really matter what term I use. So that's our metadata, and if I just go ahead and upload a document to this list, to this library, that guy will do. Now the user is going to be prompted again, for the metadata, and we get the same interface that we just saw for the default value. So I don't like the default value as the end user. I'm going to go ahead and choose digital dashboard.
Because we know that makes sense.
Yeah, because that's what everybody wants, right? That's basically what a team site is.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, so that's our sort of creating the capability from the IT side, setting up the service app, but also how we configure our columns. There's one more thing we can do with this stuff, though, is enable navigation. So I can go ahead to my library settings over here, and we have an option in sort of that lights up once we have that service application deployed called metadata navigation settings. And this is very useful for large lists and libraries. Somebody else is doing a talk on that, so I'm not going to spend too long on it. But I can go ahead and add my ProdTech stuff over in here, and click OK. And if I go back to the view of the library now, you can see here now I have this hierarchy which is driven by my metadata. So I can navigate by my metadata. And of course I can, there's no documents that meet that, and you can see it's telling me which ones are selected and so on. So pretty powerful stuff. And
we're trying to, remember what we said earlier about trying to take that guesswork from the users out. They don't know what they necessarily need to put in there, so we're trying to take a lot of that out. The content type site collection, maybe just a quick mention on the things like document IDs on the content type hub store.
Oh, yes. No, I'll talk about that in the second.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll be quiet then.
Well, you've got to start talking again now, mate.
Actually, why don't we just go straight to that?
Yeah?
Because otherwise we're going to run out of time, I guess, aren't we?
Cool. Well, we can flip through those at the end.
Yeah.
So, so that's... Oh, no, that's wrong. Here we are. This is what we want. So... yeah, that's our term sets. Now we're going to look at content type syndication. It's also called content type publishing. It's also called enterprise content types. 3 terms used by Microsoft to describe the same thing, just like all their other stuff, right? You need 3 terms. So I'm going to go back to the central administration and managed service apps. And I'm going to go ahead and... no, I'm not. I'm going to go ahead and enter the URL of my hub site collection down here. Now, this is a one-time hit. You can change it later by a PowerShell, but if you want to change this in the UI, you're out of luck. You have to throw it away and create a new one, which includes a new database and all the rest of it.
Whole service,
so,
yep.
It kind of refers to what Steve was talking about in terms of making sure you spend the time to do the project right. Make sure you don't end up in a situation where you want to change this URL 6 months down the line. So you're going to get into a fix there. So I'm going to type that in. It's SP2010 /MD hub. Oops, I need to stick that in correctly. And I have an option here. I'm going to report syndication, import errors from site collections using this. Now what that means is the consuming site collections are going to push up error information into the service, to the content type gallery. You click OK. And now that configuration has been applied, I can go ahead and select these two checkboxes. I can select the third one, which was grayed out before. So I'm not going to... It's not really worth going into the details, but basically push down content type updates from the gallery to subsites is the setting that we're really interested in here. Click OK. So now I've configured this guy, the publishing site collection, to be my metadata hub. And the reason I've chosen the publishing site collection is because by default the publishing site collection has all of the features that I need to do this. Things like document ID, document sets, and so on. Actually, that's quite interesting. It's saying it doesn't have them. What have I done wrong here?
Because the template that you select, when you create, because you guys are going to create the site collection for this as part of your managed metadata, right? So when you actually create that managed metadata service, part of your planning will be creating that site collection that's going to be used to host this. When you create that site collection, you're going to have to choose a template. Depending on which template you choose, determines which features you're going to need to turn on or off, which will therefore determine the actual content types that are going to be available.
So you don't need to use a publishing site collection for this gallery. It's just the easiest way to get it up and running without extra steps. Okay, so it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to have an AdventureWorks graphic hard-coded in the site template unless you like it, right? I mean, not a bad logo. Okay, so I'm in the hub, and I'm going to go ahead and create a site content type here in the gallery, the site content types. I'm going to try and speed up a little bit.
So has that changed at all, though, from the, let's say you're a site collection user, it's the same thing, isn't it, for them?
Yeah, same thing they're used to doing. They would have been doing it before. In fact, before they were probably doing it in 5 different places. Now they just do it here, and the 4 other sites consume the content. So it's good
unless
for them.
we let the weirdos create solutions, of course.
Yeah, well, then you're just in trouble. I mean, that's just asking for trouble. So I'm going to call my content type, I'm not very imaginative, ECT1. Well, no, let's just do end content type 1. Oops.
Are admins ever any good at naming things like this? We're useless, aren't we? We're terrible.
No imagination. Well, you could put a GUID in there, I suppose. But,
well, yeah.
So we'll choose document content types, and I'm going to use the basic document one because I always use that in my demos. But I am going to create a new group because then it makes it easier for me to find it, hopefully, when it's been published. So I'll call it ECT, click OK. And what I'll also do here is I'm going to add a new site column to this as well, and we'll call this, what was it, prod tech. And we'll do manage actually I'll do it prod tech 2. We'll do manage metadata and basically do the same thing that we saw before. So we can use term sets and content type publishing together to force the, hang on, I just select it in here, products and technologies, there we go. I won't give it a default value this time. And so now we have a content type, very simple. It's got the name, title, a file, and the managed metadata. And I also have a link here in the settings called Manage Publishing for this content type. I can go in here and I can choose Publish. And as soon as I hit OK, what it's going to do is it's going to submit it's going to submit a reference to this content type to the back-end managed metadata service. And so really, my consuming site collections now should pick this up. But you have to remember to do something. The way this works, just like everything else, is a timer job. So if I go into the right page, and I go into Review Job Definitions, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to narrow this down to the web application that I'm interested in, SharePoint 2010, and we will...
That's a very unique name.
Yeah. don't tell me they've changed the names on me in between builds.
No, it's a subscriber, isn't it? Content type subscriber.
Here we go.
Yeah.
I have the content type subscriber job, and it's set by default in the pre-release to be hourly, and that's a sensible setting. Because you think about it, it's not a sensible setting for us, like, trying to test things are working and so on, but in the real world, hourly is a sensible setting. But I'm going to go ahead and use the brand new Run Now button, and I'm going to go ahead and check out the running jobs, and you can see we're either at 5%, 50%, or complete. All right? That's the extent of the quality of this animation here. They borrowed the code from the Windows file copy guys.
Just be thankful they didn't give them Silverlight for it. That's
very true. Yeah, very true. So hopefully, now on my SP 2010 site, I can go ahead to, I'll just actually confuse myself. I'll go back here and I'll go to my library settings again. Over here. And I'm going to go to my advanced settings. I'm going to turn on content type management. So this is no different from 2007. It basically allows me to have more than one document template in a library, effectively. Here's my content types. I'm going to add from existing site content types. Here's my ECT group. So that's a good sign when you're doing this. It's working. There's my enterprise content type, yipe, which I mistyped. I haven't had a drink yet either. It's pretty impressive. And we'll click OK.
Well, yipe's probably right. Well, there you go.
I go to my new document, drop down. There's my enterprise content type. Now, of course, in this demo, both these two sites, whilst they're under the same URL, they're two different site collections, right? And we can use this. Every application, every web application that's in the default proxy group in this environment, which is called Service Application Associations, everything that's in this, every web app in my entire setup, whether it's in the same boxes or not, will get the content types from this content type gallery. So I can do them across web applications as well. And that's basically what we've got. There's a couple of other things from the site itself, the metadata hub. We can view the publishing logs somewhere in here, content type, service application, error logs. So we can see if things are going wrong, it's going to stick an entry into this list. So in this case, I'm the content type author. I can see what's going wrong with the subscribers. For my subscribers, and from the service application level, I can do that as well. So when things don't go so well, like maybe the feature wasn't there, so maybe one of the features that content type was dependent on didn't exist, it would bubble up in that interface. And
you can see that as well sometimes if you try and consume from the user perspective. Where's the site collection expense? Go and show this one. Oh,
so this is...
you read in my mind.
As the site collection admin itself of the consumer, we can view back. That's just going to link us back to the same screen I was on before. This guy's showing us which ones we've got and where they're coming from, and this just takes us there as well. And we can force to refresh everything. So we're not sure whether it's what it should be. We're a bit uneasy. We don't really, we phoned up the guy that's doing the stuff at the hub, and he said, oh yeah, I did that last night. But he's not. He's been a bit sneaky. He's going to get up early in the morning and do it. I hope you don't notice. You can click this and it'll force a refresh of everything. So it basically throws them away and recreates them. And of course, this goes to the management screen for that content type. So you can see it. And this is in our site content types. You notice all of my settings have vanished apart from my advanced settings. So I can't, because it's configured at the hub, right? So there's no point in me being able to do those other settings.
And it's all about making sure the user goes quickly to the place who's managing the terms to update them where necessary. And I'll give you a common example of where that error log comes in handy with troubleshooting this managed metadata then subscription process. would be one of those features missing. So again, if we've got a content type syndicating down that's using the document ID element as part of our metadata, so we want to, this is a part of a compliancy situation. So we're using the document ID feature, pushing it down as part of the enterprise content types. If I'm not supporting that at the site collection layer where I'm consuming it, you're going to error out because it's going to say, I haven't got that feature to support that piece that's in the enterprise content type. So you will see those in the errors, like the feature up, republish it, and you should be ready to go.
This one's quite important as well. This is just a list of the stuff that gets the stuff that gets published when we do that push down. And it's all of the stuff, right? The template, all that kind of stuff. The information management policies, right? So if you're deleting, sales quotes after a month, that'll come across. But the important thing here is your workflow associations come across, but the workflows don't. So you need to make sure any custom workflows are deployed to the consuming site collections. Otherwise, they won't fire, of course.
And so we're not saying that you should always create enterprise content types using your enterprise content type hub and your managed metadata. Not necessarily everything goes here, right? You've got to determine what is that core business requirement to go here that's standardized so that people don't have to guess at the core business stuff. What we're saying is there might be a mixture between that site collection logic where the users are creating and managing those site collection content types because it's specific to their stream and there's nobody else who's going to know how to work that. Or you're going to go into the enterprise level because you've created the IA architecture around your business logic and your information architecture. So you know and you can define it at the top and build the model, and then they can add to it in their own local site collections.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, there's absolutely nothing wrong with just having regular site content types. And it may be the case that that is a good first step to getting to the good state, the nirvana that Steve was talking about earlier, right at the start of the session. Once people are comfortable with their site content types, they've made all their mistakes. They've gone through a few revs of that content type in their site collections, and they think, oh, that might be useful somewhere else as well. And then you can move it to the hub, and you're good to go.
Yep.
This diagram is just an example of how you can use one metadata service application to do content type publishing to multiple farms. So we would have an inter-farm trust, which is pretty straightforward to set up. Our connection, so we don't have a service application for managed metadata over on this farm. We just have a connection proxy back to the one at the top here.
So that would be using that managed, the publishing, web app, the service publishing that I showed yesterday in that application services talk, where we showed the screen where we have that really short URL when we add the PKI bit to it.
Yeah. So this is a common request from customers, what Microsoft would call a top ask.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Yeah. I mean, think about it. You're going to create a corporate-wide taxonomy for business structure across potentially 8 groups or divisions around the world to consume into their farms, and then they will have their own local taxonomy for whatever business unit they're in. And therefore, because we can publish per service, we're obviously not consuming masses of bandwidth like we had the problem before.
Yeah. Another key scenario for this is acquisition, right? So a big company, you've already, you're huge, but you acquire another large company, and you want to over time assimilate the acquired company. So you're going to force your corporate reference master data or your controlled vocabulary onto that new acquisition. So
and how hard is that, right? If that happens, currently, if you go and take over a big corporate business and you're trying to merge the two together, it's currently for most companies it's a nightmare because they don't have the ability to entwine the two.
Right. Yeah. Before this, basically, you've got 2 options. You either continue to have 2 separate controlled vocabularies, or you throw one of them away. Is basically the 2 options we have.
I usually end up with 5, actually. It's a norm.
Yeah. Oh, and there's some, little animations.
We spared no expense.
Some considerations to think about. We've kind of covered most of this. Obviously, we can have multiple hubs. The third one, discriminatory terms. this isn't about being insulting to your end users. We're saying, if you're doing control vocabulary, make sure, as Steve mentioned, that your end users understand what you mean by that term. So if you were, for example, a car manufacturer, you wouldn't use the term car if your factory was in Germany, right? You would use the term auto, right? Because they don't call it a car. So you got, that's a simple example. But if you're a brand business, for example, you're going to have different territories, even if they're the same language, are going to have different terms for the same thing. So just include that in the planning. And plan for scalability. The size of the database is directly proportional to how many terms you've got, etc., etc., etc.
Well, I'm covering databases in last session today.
Okay.
But I will finish in time for the party, don't worry.
So that's us. If you have any questions, we've got a few minutes, haven't we, maybe? What time do we finish?
Now.
Right,
We're gone.
Right, we don't have many times for questions. If you have any questions, do them to the Twitter tag, SPEVO IT Pro, and we'll pick them up at the ATE.
And we're around. If you haven't got the Twitter stuff and all the rest of it, we're around. Just come and see me. I'll write your question down. We'll add it to the ASCII experts and stuff as well. Thanks for your time, everybody.
Thank you.